impossible. Fracking is stoppable. Another world is possible.
What we're seeing there is a snatch arrest, of which there have been one or two this morning, according to protesters. Somebody taken away from their tent and driven off in the police van.
We are moving away from the frack-free planet! Frack-free planet! Frack-free planet! Frack-free planet!
Fracking, the system of hydraulic fracturing for shale gas, is becoming one of those polarised environmental issues like GM crops, badger culling or wind turbines, where the bald question, are you pro or anti, tends to define your tribe. But for this week's Costing the Earth, I want to ask, is there a way shale gas can be extracted cleanly, safely and with relatively little global warming impact? We'll be coming back to the UK later, but I'm starting in the US, where fracking's been practised for years. Can we learn from their successes and also their mistakes? Welcome to Texas and a stretch of sun-baked gravel and prairie that's today shimmering under 97 degrees Fahrenheit. A few miles from here, Bonnie and Clyde robbed their banks and attempted to escape from the law. But just here is something else which is going to make history. I'm going to put this place on the map. I'm standing next to the S.H. Griffin number 4 well, and this place can lay claim to be the birth of the modern fracking industry. It was here back in the summer of '98 that an engineer called Steinsberger successfully fracked shale rock with a mixture of water, chemicals, sand and a sort of lubricant to really yield quantities of gas. This was the place that proved it worked, and since then over 100,000 fracking wells have been drilled across America. There are houses near here. Let's go and see what the locals think.
I didn't know I was next to history to a week or so ago, and somebody mentioned that was the first fracking well in this part of the country. So
yeah. Who was here first, the well or your homes?
My home was here, and then they started working on the well.
And what did you think when they started working?
Well, I didn't know what to think. It was real noisy till they finished, and now then there's not, you don't pay any attention.
And that's not the only shale gas well here, is it? There's another one I can see down there, and another one, must be 3 or 4 within sight of here. I mean, this is really much shale gas central, isn't it?
Right,
yeah.
right.
And since the wells were here, has that stopped the community from growing?
No. Well, we came in and there was only 4 or 5 houses, and that began to fill up real quick. And then the new addition down here, the brick homes, newspaper told us it's 446 homes, the fastest growing community in the state of Texas.
From your point of view, homes and shale gas wellheads can live pretty happily together.
I have no problem with it. We don't gripe. We did gripe because a guy owns about 6 or 7 acres in the middle of this. We knew he wanted to put a liquor joint there, so we didn't want that. We just don't need it.
So, here at least, liquor stores hold greater peril than fracking. Housing and shale gas seem to thrive side by side. But elsewhere in America, there have been cases of water poisoning, methane leakage and earth tremors, all linked to fracking. Fracking for shale gas has been going on in Texas for at least a decade now, but that doesn't mean that everybody has come to learn to love it. I'm just at the edge of the city of Denton in North Texas, and I'm with Adam Briggle, whose t-shirt rather gives him away. It says on it, Frack-free Denton, and he's brought us to a place next to a very big drilling rig, with something that's being lowered down into the earth even as we speak. Adam, what's happening over there?
That's right. They're drilling 5 or 6 additional wells. There was 1 well existing on this site. And so what you're seeing here is a drilling rig that's going to be operating day and night 24/7 for a month or more. And then what will come in after this will be the hydraulic fracturing operation.
I guess that rig itself is about 35, 40 meters high, something like that. And then around the base of them you've got various tanks, compressor engines, a big wall, all, I guess, in an area about the size of a soccer pitch or something like that. What is it that you really don't like about fracking?
Well, the problem with fracking in Denton is that it's the only industrial activity permitted in residential neighborhoods. We don't even allow bakeries. We have the worst air quality in the state, and there are studies that estimate that the fracking going on contributes at least half of that, in addition to all the truck and car traffic which is apparent in this part of the country. Plus, It poses a risk to our surface and our groundwater resources. So there's a lot that's just not compatible with the place where people are trying to live. Although it appears innocuous, when you turn a FLIR camera on it, which can capture invisible emissions, oftentimes you'll find toxic gases coming off of these things. And oftentimes the operators don't know about them because they're not checking up on them.
Gases like what?
We've discovered benzene. Here we've done some air quality studies. Of course, those are expensive, and the citizens have to pay for them out of their own pocket because it's not covered by the government.
Tell me about the campaign you're running.
Well, Frack Free Denton is a campaign to ban hydraulic fracturing in the city limits of Denton. What people don't understand is that this, for us, was a last-ditch effort. We spent years working with the city very hard to negotiate with drillers for stricter regulations on this process. And at every turn they balked and they wouldn't budge on anything. And at the end of the day, we still had fracking within 200 feet of homes. Now it's going to go to the ballot on November 4th.
Is that a vote on whether Denton will ban fracking?
Yes, it's a vote to ban hydraulic fracturing in the city limits, and that means on all existing wells they couldn't come back and refrack a well even if it already exists.
It's quite interesting what you were saying about this being the last resort. I mean, were you actually against fracking totally, or were you at one point sort of prepared to be reasonable and say, look, let's have it here, but not here, but you just found that the politicians were just rolling over in front of the companies?
I think our city leaders were doing the best they could, but their hands are just tied by state laws that are systematically biased towards the industry, and we were just sort of intimidated by an industry that failed to change their ways.
Denton's gas comes from the Barnett Shale, so how does the industry respond to those accusations of environmental damage and bullying the authorities? Ed Ireland from the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council opens with a wider environmental defence.
I think the environment's being improved.
Really?
Sure. You can look at any graph the EPA has in the United States. Air and water is cleaner over time than it ever has been. Natural gas is much cleaner than coal. One thing about these wells, they are drilled in less than 4 to 6 weeks. So it's not something that goes on forever. So there is a temporary inconvenience, and I understand that.
During that time, we've heard that there's an enormous amount of traffic, and more than half the air pollution around Denton comes from the fracking business.
So who?
Says Frack Free Denton.
Well, I'd like to see their proof of that. The city of Denton does have a fairly high level of air pollution, and the main reason for that is that they are at the intersection of 2 major interstate highways. Denton's air pollution problem did not begin just a few years ago.
One of the other accusations that's been put is that there are undeclared, unknown almost, toxic emissions from wellheads when fracking is going on and afterwards, including benzene. Is that true?
You look at an actual chemical analysis of Barnett Shale gas, it has a very, very minor benzene component.
So are there benzene leakages around the drilling in Denton?
The amount of benzene in the natural gas in this area is tiny. And when the Barnett Shale is drilled into, nothing comes out until it's hydraulically fractured. The process of hydraulic fracturing takes about 5 to 7 days. And when it's finished, that natural gas well is no different than any natural gas well drilled anywhere else.
And during that 5 to 7 days, are there leakages of things into the environment which are toxic?
Most of what goes into the environment at these sites is coming from diesel trucks.
Do you think the health of the people of Denton is being damaged by shale gas exploration?
No.
How can you be so sure?
I've been in this business for 30 years. The process of drilling and the equipment associated with it have only improved. You know, emissions from oil and gas drilling there's just no comparison as to what they are now, say, compared to 10 or 20 years ago.
To try and get a more analytical and nationwide view of the impact of shale gas, I spoke to Wall Street Journal energy reporter Russell Gold. He's just written a book, The Boom: How Fracking Ignited the American Energy Revolution and Changed the World.
It turned us from energy paupers into energy princes. We were importing more and more oil, and we were preparing to start importing lots of natural gas. And the exact opposite is happening now. We're completely rethinking our position in the world in terms of energy. We no longer have to be global policemen to keep the shipping lanes open.
So radically changed the energy picture of America. What has it done to the landscape of large parts of America?
Well, if you go to places like the middle of Pennsylvania, North Dakota, and South Texas, they look nothing like they used to look. There have been drilling rigs, clear cuts for pipelines. We're basically talking about the industrialization of parts of the United States. The number of trucks.
The word fracking has attracted the attention, and certainly those opposed have kind of sold it as a big threat, a big danger. Is it actually the fracking itself, if there are hazards, which is the main hazard, or is it just kind of the whole scale of the operation?
The fracking itself is not the really dangerous part. Where you have problems is the whole industrial activity of drilling the well. So you might have a spill because some of the chemicals that are being used in fracking are up on the surface. Disposing of the wastewater has turned out to be an enormous problem. You put all this water in, millions of gallons comes back out, and you have to dispose of that. We've been putting it in many places in the United States in these deep disposal wells, and they've been triggering earthquakes. The well itself is a big problem. If that well is not built right to withstand 20, 30, 50, 60 years in the earth, you could potentially have problems. Because if you think about it, normally it would take millennia for anything to migrate upwards from those deep shales to the aquifers. But a well is like a giant superhighway between the two. And if you're not building it properly so it's cemented and secure, you can have problems. And the other thing we need to really focus on is methane leakage. Natural gas itself is a greenhouse gas. And if you are just allowing it to escape into the air, a lot of the benefits you get from natural gas are erased. So you go from having a twice as good to, well, not quite twice as good, maybe 60 or 70% better. So there really needs to be a focus on doing this right.
What would you say to Britain, a country that's considering going down the shale gas route?
The United States, we just sort of recklessly charge ahead and do things. You know, we frack first and then ask questions later, are we doing this right? So frankly, countries that are now looking to do it, like Britain, can really benefit from our mistakes and what we've learned. How to build a well right, how to test water and air before you even start anything and then afterwards. So we have the data to compare what is the impact of this well. Because we didn't do that in the United States, and we ended up with lots of lawsuits and people arguing about, oh, well, you contaminated my water. No, I didn't. The water was contaminated already, and it was a big waste of time. And also, you have to have a really serious talk about where do you build these wells? Because you can just build them everywhere. And do you require, for instance, 16 wells on each pad so that you have a minimal footprint disturbance? And where do you put that? Do you put it right next to a school, or do you move it to an industrial area which is more accustomed to that? All these
Even though it may cost a little bit more in terms of drilling because the school had to be right on top of the sweet spot.
Exactly. And so all of these questions really need to be addressed up front.
So will wisdom flow across the pond? There are important differences between our two countries in landscape, population density, and mineral rights. In the US, individuals can own and make money from gas beneath their land, whereas here, it's the property of the Crown Estate. But there are similarities too. Firstly, the promise of shale-based wealth.
The scale is potentially massive because of the nature of the ground in this area. It's likely to see that the first shale drilling and first commercial exploitation of shale would be in the Fylde coast.
Rob Green from Blackpool Fylde and Wire Economic Development Company says the investment is much needed.
It's not going to be an absolute replica of Aberdeen or Dallas or Houston, but it will see a real economic stimulus to the area. The Fylde coast relies very heavily on the public sector and the visitor economy for developing its wealth and employment for residents, and this offers a welcome new strand of employment. You will see certainly in the initial exploration phases there will have to be workforce moving into the area. They'll be staying in the hotels, using taxis, eating in the restaurants and so on.
But there are several groups fighting the frackers. Until recently, one of the sites was occupied by protesters from Reclaim the Power. James Green says it's now a global campaign.
We had a good song yesterday night that somebody came up with, Romania, Pennsylvania, people everywhere, we don't want frackmania. And that was just a response to the fact that we've had activists from Pennsylvania in America who've really seen the massive scale of commercial fracking, the number of wells. We've had activists from Romania who've been resisting action there. What we want is clean, community-controlled renewables, and the jobs that could be damaged by fracking, by tourism, by food production, by beer, these are all real jobs that exist now. And to make claims about hypothetical jobs, which are based on massively inflated figures, at the risk of the real jobs that happen now, trades that people have been involved with for years, it's an unfair argument to make in that sense.
Whether for better or worse, there is little doubt the arrival of the energy business will change the local economy. Francis Egan is managing director of Quadrilla, and I suggested his company's plans to extract gas from beneath Lancashire could harm tourism.
I would take issue with you. I don't know where you're getting the data to say that there is likely to have an impact on tourist businesses.
Well, the people there think there will be, and also the impression of fracking is that it is an industrial business in a beautiful landscape.
Well, some of the people there think it will be. In fact, the head of the Hotel Association in Blackpool is a big supporter of the industry and says it will actually benefit Blackpool's hotel businesses.
If there were evidence, if there were a business that could prove that it had been affected by your business, would you compensate them?
If there is proof, we will consider it. But, if a meteor lands from the space, is somebody going to make a claim on that? I have heard many claims, and they're very rarely supported by the facts.
But there are other environmental fears: increased traffic, earth tremors, water contamination, even diminishing milk yields. Some may be more plausible than others, but all represent fear of the new and powerful industry. Credible reassurance could be delivered by what American author and reporter Russell Gold recommended: robust and trusted regulation. Lancashire residents Barry and Elizabeth Warner from Rosica Awareness Group live about a mile from one of the proposed wells.
The way that they're doing it is, lots of us find just incredible. So, for example, there will be monitoring of certain things, but the monitoring is done by Quadrilla, who, want it to go ahead, who've got hundreds of millions of pounds at stake at it, and they do the monitoring.
If we were serious about regulation, would we ask the industry and rely entirely on the industry to produce the only data? The whole of the framework within which this is being introduced is so suspiciously angled towards the presumption to permit that you can't have any confidence in it.
The Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering wrote a report to government in 2012 saying fracking could go ahead safely in the UK, but with 10 key recommendations. Amongst them, strengthening well inspections and robust monitoring of methane levels both before and after fracking. Mike Hill has worked as an engineer in the oil and gas industry and was cited in the report. He's a critic of current regulation.
That report came out over 2 years ago, and in that time only 1 out of the 10 recommendations has actually been implemented, and that's in relation to the seismic traffic light system. So basically the government are moving in entirely the wrong direction at this point in time. They are now putting the public at significant risk from fracking as well as the environment, and so at this point I don't believe that fracking can be allowed to continue in the UK.
Scrutiny of the shale gas business will fall on 2 regulatory bodies: the Environment Agency, governing risks to land, air and water, and the Health and Safety Executive, looking at well and drilling safety. They have shared these duties in Britain's existing oil and gas industry up until now, and the Energy Minister, Matt Hancock, thinks the model works.
We've absolutely got to go ahead in a way that is safe, that is well regulated, that is reasonable, but the potential is great so long as we can get this right.
The Royal Society report said well integrity is of the highest priority. They want independent well inspection, and yet you're not saying that's something that has to happen.
Of course, well integrity is the highest priority, and the Health and Safety Executive will check each one of these applications as appropriate to make sure, on a risk base, to make sure that they are safe. And remember that we've been drilling for oil onshore in the UK for more than 50 years. It is a well-organised, well-regulated operation. We've got to make sure that that happens when exploring for shale gas, as in the same way as we do for conventional oil.
So will there be on-site independent well inspection?
There is a process so that the regulator has the opportunity to inspect every well as required.
But that's not the same. At the moment, you're largely leaving it up to the companies themselves to, mark their own homework, inspect their well.
No, absolutely not. This is about the regulator inspecting and having the opportunity to inspect wherever they want to.
Well, they have the opportunity, but you're not saying it's mandatory for an independent inspection of every well, are you?
I'm saying that it's mandatory that the regulator ensures that they are happy with what is happening at each well.
But this is a massive expansion, potentially, of what's happening onshore, and you're relying on a regulator, the HSE and the Environment Agency, whose expertise and resources have been significantly cut in this area.
Well, obviously, as and when this expands, and I hope that it does expand, of course we've got to make sure that the regulator has the full resources to deal with that. They have those resources at the moment, but at the moment there are planning applications for a relatively small number of wells.
That's a very clear promise, is that the resources for the regulator will increase if this industry grows.
It's an absolute commitment.
The HSE says it studies well notifications and weekly operations reports and conducts on-site inspections as it deems appropriate. Alongside the Environment Agency, they will visit all shale gas sites during exploration. The EA also says it will review its regulatory approach as the industry develops. But does relying on the industry to deliver so much of the initial operational data really deliver a tough inspection regime? Francis Egan again, Managing Director of Quadrilla, says we should trust the HSE.
If they have any issues with any of the reports we submit, or any other complaints or concerns, they will come to the site. It's the same offshore, has been the same for decades, and has served the UK very well.
Even the supporters of fracking in shale gas in America acknowledge that the two key areas where the industry perhaps hasn't always delivered as well as it should is in well integrity, i.e. making sure that the concrete sleeve round your well is really screening the ground and the groundwater from the gas, and also making sure that you're not leaking methane. Are we going to do better than America on those things?
Well, we already are. The well integrity, as you call it, the experience in the UK onshore and offshore has been very positive. The wells are designed and implemented with multiple barriers, so there's never just one barrier preventing gas or oil escaping from the well. There have been cases where barriers have failed, but very, very few cases where all the barriers have failed and therefore the well integrity is compromised. The actual numbers of well integrity failures where all the barriers have been breached and oil or gas has escaped into the environment in the UK are very, very small.
Do you have independent well inspection?
We have independent well examiners. Their role is to review the design.
But as a matter of course, you do not have, as I understand it, independent well inspection, and the integrity of wells is crucial to the potential for local pollution.
Again, that is incorrect. The job of the Health and Safety Executive is to assure the integrity of wells. They can do that in many ways. They can come to the site and look at what's going on in the site, but more importantly, they can review the results of pressure tests, the results of casing that has been run, and they don't have to come to the site to do that.
But they're looking at your data in that case, aren't they?
So are you suggesting that our data and the companies that work for us and everyone else is going to falsify their data and send false data to the HSE?
Well, the experience from America is that without independent inspection, at times, the companies have been able to get away with stuff that they shouldn't have been able to. And that's what people want to see can't happen here.
Well, that's not the experience from the UK, and it hasn't been the experience from offshore in the UK, and exactly the same regulatory system works offshore in the UK. For any industry, if you say that the only way the industry can proceed is that every single step of every single job there has to be a HSE inspector standing over someone's shoulder reviewing that, then no oil and gas extraction will happen in the UK, which I think a lot of, some people who ask for that, actually that is their underlying desire.
Will there be independent monitoring of methane levels both before, during and after drilling?
I expect so. I expect the Environment Agency will participate in that, and we will also monitor it.
You would acknowledge that that's important in order to make sure that the shale gas is delivering its relatively low greenhouse gas potential.
Well, I think it's important for a number of reasons, not least for the one you talked yourself about in terms of the wells, establishing public confidence, because again, people have been told that shale gas is going to pollute their drinking water, which is far from the truth. The groundwater in the UK typically contains methane already. I don't think a lot of people realise that, but I think it is important, yes.
The Royal Society told us they would be monitoring the government's commitment to implement their recommendations, and stressed the need for making it clear to the public that ministers were delivering what they promised. In the end, trusted regulation means agreeing robust laws and checking they're followed. Tough rules and sharp teeth. Author and journalist Russell Gold applied this prescription when things got personal and the frackers came knocking at his parents' place, but it applies equally to whole countries.
I could no longer be a reporter, have this removed distance. I had to really engage with it and to think about and to really ask this question: if we open the door for fracking, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I eventually encouraged them to do it, but with certain limits. I said, look, when you drill for natural gas, you're bringing a relatively clean burning, efficient fuel. I also said to them, look, until you sign this lease, you're in the driver's seat. Negotiate, try to get the rig as far away from the pond, which you love, and some of the hiking areas, which you love. And they did that. And they drilled one well. And later on, I said, you really need to be very careful about this well. You should find out whether the well has good integrity. Because if they build a well where some of the cement maybe isn't as strong as it should be, you can't have leakage over time. And that was very scary because my father made a number of phone calls and he couldn't find out. And quite often you can't get those answers from the state and the regulators who are supposed to be looking out for your interests. So that's not to say that fracking is destroying the environments, but the fear that's created because you don't know is very real.
Costing the Earth was presented by Tom Heap, and the producer was Anne-Marie Bullock. Next week, Tom will be in the Caribbean to find out if paradise is prepared for climate change.